All right, let's get right into it because we're about to unpack a really shocking economic mystery. India is one of the world's fastest growing economies, a rising global power. But there's this number, this statistic hidden inside that success story that just doesn't make any sense. 75%, 3 out of every 4 women in India are not in the labor force. That means they're not employed and they're not even looking for a job. And just so we're clear, this isn't some statistical anomaly. If anything, this number is actually on the conservative side. To really put this into perspective, get this. India's rate of female unemployment is higher than Saudi Arabia's. A country where women were only given the right to drive in 2018. This is a puzzle on a massive, massive scale. And honestly, the reality gets even more stark when you follow the numbers all the way down. So out of 681 million women in India, about 509 million are of working age. Okay. But only 122 million of them are even considered part of the labor force. And then, according to one Indian think tank, the number who are meaningfully employed, we're talking more than just an hour a week, is a tiny 38 million. That's just 8.8% of all working age women. So what on earth is going on here? Well, to solve this mystery, we've got to do what any good detective would do. First, we have to eliminate the most common explanations. Let's run through the usual suspects and see if they actually hold up. Okay, so the first theory you often hear is that, India is getting richer, so families can now afford to live on just one income. It sounds plausible, right? Makes a certain kind of sense. But the data says, nope, not even close. India's per capita GDP is just a little over $2,000. That is 1/5 of the world average. Economically, the country is roughly where China was 20 years ago. So widespread wealth is definitely not the reason. That theory is out. All right, so what about education? The common wisdom, and this is backed by the World Bank, is that the more educated women are, the more likely they are to join the workforce. This has to be it, right? And this is where the story gets really weird. In India, the exact opposite is true. More education for women actually correlates with a lower chance of being employed. College enrollment for women has soared, but female labor participation has been falling for years. It's a total paradox. So then you think, okay, what about culture? Issues of safety and family honor. They're a huge piece of this puzzle for sure. But then you look right next door at Bangladesh. It shares many of the same cultural norms. It ranks just as poorly on women's safety indexes. And yet, women in Bangladesh work at a much, much higher rate. So clearly there's something else going on. The real answer seems to lie in this powerful socioeconomic idea that one researcher has called the patrilineal trap. For a lot of Indian families, the decision boils down to a very direct trade-off. On one side of the scale, you have the income a daughter could earn, but on the other side, you have the family's honor, which, in their view, can be tarnished if a woman works outside the home, and that could potentially hurt her marriage prospects. So this trade-off creates something that economists call a U-curve. Here's how it works. When a family is in deep poverty, women have to work. Survival just outweighs that honor penalty. But then, as incomes rise just enough for a family to get by on one salary, that honor penalty wins out, and women stay home. That's the trap. It's only when wages get much, much higher that the income finally outweighs the social penalty, and women start to rejoin the workforce in big numbers. And this perfectly explains India's situation. As a country, it's stuck right there at the bottom of the U. Wages are just high enough for many families to survive on a man's income, but they are nowhere near high enough to overcome that powerful social pressure for women to stay home. So this brings us to the next, even bigger question. In an economy that's growing at 6% a year, one of the fastest in the world, why are wages still so stubbornly low? And the numbers, well, they tell a pretty shocking story. Even with all that incredible GDP growth, India has failed to create jobs. Between 1999 and 2005, the economy added 60 million new jobs. Great. But in the 6 years that followed, just 3 million. It is a classic case of what economists call jobless growth. So where are all the jobs? Well, a huge reason is that companies in India are basically incentivized to stay small. There are these really strict labor laws. We're talking about everything from paid leave to needing government permission to fire someone that kick in the second a company hits 10 employees. You add that to the desire to avoid labor inspectors and potential corruption, and you've got a massive disincentive to grow. And what's the result? A lot of Indian businesses have decided that 9 is the perfect number of workers. Over 80% of apparel firms, for instance, have fewer than 8 employees. And these tiny companies, they're just way less productive. which means lower wages, which means less consumer demand, which means, you guessed it, fewer jobs. It's a really vicious cycle. But there's a second, even bigger structural problem. Pretty much every country that has escaped poverty followed the same path. You move your economy from agriculture to manufacturing and then to services. India, though, for a bunch of reasons, basically skipped that crucial middle step. And this had a devastating effect, especially on women. As farming got more productive, women were pushed off the land. But unlike in East Asia, where they could go find work in garment factories, in India, those factories mostly didn't exist at a large scale. Sure, a few women got high-paying service jobs, but the vast majority had nowhere to go. They just left the labor market completely. And all of this brings us to the absolutely enormous stakes for India's future. The country is at this critical fork in the road, and what happens next will decide whether its greatest asset becomes a blessing or a curse. Because India has one thing that much of the world, especially China, doesn't have: youth. Its median age is just 28 compared to 38 in China and 48 in Japan. It has this massive young population and a demographic window of about 2 more decades to really harness all that energy. The potential upside here is just astronomical. According to Bloomberg, just by bringing women into the workforce at the same rate as men, India could grow its economy by nearly a third by 2050. I mean, this isn't just a social issue. It's one of the biggest economic opportunities on the entire planet. So this, then, is the final, crucial question. If India can fix its job market and break that patrilineal trap, this young generation could power it into the ranks of the world's great economic powers. But if it fails, it risks being stuck with millions of angry, unemployed, and aimless young people. Will they be a demographic dividend or a demographic disaster? The clock is ticking.